Does everybody know each other here?
Talk to a developer friend here. I don't know your name, but Chris.
I'm Rick. Right, you guys ready?
Yes.
All right, you are live.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here soon. We've got a few more stragglers, but I'll manage that. So I'm pretty much just a few quick announcements. For those that are new, welcome. We got a calendar filling up now, so I think we're looking pretty good all the way through the end of the year here soon. Next month, Kenny Peoples is coming down. He's going to talk about a few service works and some, and I think we'll do a workshop with that. That's on the agenda to do there. So we'll have some exercises. So if you come, bring your laptops, play along. July, we're going to do an OpenShift App Dynamics talk, monitoring a JBoss app on an OpenShift out there using the App Dynamics software. If you're not familiar with that one, so we've had a few talks on OpenShift in the past. So hopefully you guys are pretty familiar with that, or yeah, not. You will be next month, or July is a good one to come to. App Dynamics is an application monitoring tool out there, so it'll give you a good way to see some insight about a JBoss application. So that'll be good. August, we have some internal project we've been working on, sort of using JBoss rules and sort of saying, hey, let's use that to win your fantasy football league. So that's what we're trying to set up with that one. So there'll be a project out there. Just as it's concept, I don't guarantee that you're going to win, but it's just taking that. So another different way to apply that rules project product to a problem. September. We have Eric Schabel's going to be on site here. He's going to do a rules-based talk in that one. So he's been sort of the lead evangelist for JBoss rules out there. He's got a lot of great projects, a lot of great content out there, so it's a good one to come see. Nothing yet for October. In November, we have our RTI, but all that will keep up on the meetup group calendar. This one, there's a new test drive for the JBoss group for this one as far as streaming on Hangout. We'll keep trying to perfect that and keep that going for the ones going out there here. That's pretty much all we got for what's coming up next. Pretty much then the rest of it, I'm going to turn all that over to Christian. And thanks for him coming out. Christian, if you've read his bio, he's pretty much Red Hat's representative on the GWT steering committee, so he can pretty much tell you what that roadmap is for GWT who's out there, as well as possibly for the Errai project, so you can tell you whatever is there. So there's probably not a more knowledgeable resource out there for what GWT is, what you do with it, and where it's going. So pretty much after that, I'm going to turn everything over to him. And next guy's coming out.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Christian. I work for JBoss by Red Hat up in Toronto, but I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, which explains my non-Canadian accent, in case you wondered. And I've spent the last 3 years or so developing and helping developing this framework called Errai, which is based on GWT, or formerly known as the Google Web Toolkit. So who here is familiar with GWT? So not even half. Okay, I'll make sure to spend some time talking about GWT itself. So what Errai is as a framework, it allows you to build rich web applications in pure Java. So Java for the server, Java for the client in the browser. And since, I can use this fancy phone. Since it's 2014, I figured the last thing you guys want to see is another Java web framework. So Errai really isn't a framework by any, or I should say, let's clarify that. It is more a declarative and typesafe programming model for the browser. What's really the difference? Why is it not a framework? Because traditionally a framework, what it would do is it would just serve pages that were rendered on the server. It would serve pages to the client, to the browser. They would just display them. That's not at all what Errai does. It is also not what usually an app does that's built with GWT. So if we look at what changed in the last couple of years, what we see is that the browsers have access to a lot more computing power than we had ever before. So the JavaScript engines get a lot faster. And they're also a lot more consistent than they used to be. Also, they're more spec compliant. So I wouldn't say the compatibility nightmares are over, but it's certainly a lot better now than it was 7 years ago. So what happens is that people put more code into the browser. Just more percentage of your whole app, the code is more in the browser than it is on the server. And if you put more code into the browser, more application logic into the browser, what you want to be able to share code between the client and the server. For instance, your business model, your validation logic, even some of your business logic. You would actually have to implement it all twice, let's say in JavaScript and Java. And not only that, you have to keep maintaining it in lockstep if you keep developing your app for a couple of years. So how can we share code between the client and the server? How can I write a business model one time and share it, a validation logic and support? One solution to this is, why don't we just take JavaScript and move it to the server? That's what Node.js does. From my perspective and from our team's perspective, this is suboptimal. First of all, because JavaScript isn't the most consistent language out there. If you were to write 10,000s, 100,000s of lines of code, it's kind of nice to have a compiler to be able to type check it, to have tooling to be able to refactor your code. So that's one of the reasons we think it's not optimal. And another thing is that in the Java world, in the last 15 years more, we've solved so many enterprise problems. Node.js is just really, in my opinion, starting to solve all the same problems. For instance, by default, and that's a deliberate design decision of Node.js, that they don't have threads. You're starting a process, and it's one event loop that processes requests as they come in. Of course, now if you have a multiple core machine, you can start multiple Node.js processes, but still, each one of those processes has one event loop, processes one thread, one request at a time, which in my opinion isn't optimal if you care, let's say if you have use cases where not every request has the same priority as other ones, right? But you can't control that. You get one request, you process it, and if that takes down your machine because it's really slow, the next one is not going to be doing anything. So what's the solution then? So our solution is, get rid of this. Our solution is, we still bet on Java. Because as I said, it's a type-safe language. You get all the tooling, the refactoring, the code analysis tools. It's extremely testable. And just as with JavaScript, you have a very large talent pool out there. So there's a lot of people available. But how can we get Java to the browser? That's where GWT, formerly known as the Google Web Toolkit, comes into play. It's also not a framework. It's also more like a tool. And at its heart, it's a Java to JavaScript compiler. that will take care of cross-browser support for you, which is less important than it used to be 5 years ago, but it's still important that you don't have to deal with all the different browser quirks. And it also applies a lot of optimizations to the JavaScript when it compiles it. So that in almost all cases, the JavaScript that the GWT compiler emits is a lot faster than the JavaScript you could have written by hand. Unless you're an absolute expert, of course, in writing JavaScript. GWT also gives you that development mode, which allows for code and refresh development. You just change code, you refresh the browser, and it loads the changes. And it allows you to debug client and server-side code in your IDE, which is also a plus if you like to use IDEs. Quite often, there are a few myths I like to quickly address with GWT. One of them is, I hear that a lot from, or we've been hearing that a lot from web developers, that if you use GWT, you have to use some sort of swing-like programming for the UI. You basically have a new panel, and then you have to add stuff to the panel, and you can't really use HTML and CSS. And that's not true for GWT itself, but it's even less true with Errai, as we see shortly. You can use just plain HTML to design your user interface. And another myth is that there's some weird, complicated server-side compilation going on, and it somehow streams the content to the client. That's also not the case. You compile the JavaScript in your IDE long before you deploy. What you deploy is just static content, just JavaScript files in HTML. So if you've been around following GWT the last couple of years, you might have heard some rumors, and I don't know what it is about our industry, but we constantly like to call out a new technology as being dead, or not so new technology as also being dead. And I think the main reason is what we've just discussed earlier, is that the choice is so big. We have so many frameworks to keep up with and so much choice that we like to rule out options, and the older options go first. So GWT's been around for a while, and it's now an actual open source project, and it's quite active. It has a number of big companies backing it up and contributing to it. In terms of users, we have over 100,000 community users. That's downloads of the SDK. Unique downloads, and there are actually thousands, yes, thousands of internal Google employees that work with GWT. So there's a lot of apps that you use on the Google stack that are actually built with GWT, and they're still developing new ones. So there's a deep interest in keeping that project alive, so it's not going to go away. If you follow the Google Plus community of GWT, there's a lot of cool new apps that come out every week that are built with GWT. And there's also still many new features that get introduced. For instance, the next release next month, 2.7, will have Java 8 Lambda support and JsInterop, which is a new way of interacting with JavaScript. So are there any questions so far? If you have any questions, just interrupt me with a small group.
We can talk about more detail later on. I was surprised a while ago when I went to a Windows 8 machine and I was using Chrome. It didn't work. There's an issue out there with in Google, issue 7778 that talked about.
I don't know the number, but
yeah, it's basically the idea is that Chrome does not. Chrome support has been.
I know what you mean.
Dropped, right? Exactly. And they said use super dev mode, and 2.6.1 has, it's in prototype stage for super dev mode.
Yes.
So is there, the documentation, just, you could really be brief because we'll get into more detail. I don't want to jump in too much with you talking.
Oh, no problem. So you're talking about development mode? Yeah.
Yeah, dev mode is not going to be, it's coming up to be super dev mode. Because you're saying it's too much of a pain to support all that.
Right, so that development mode, the old development mode relied on APIs in the browsers that got deprecated and now removed, which is why there's a new development mode now. Which will be a lot better next release, 2.7 next month. It's already working, but it's not as good as it could be, in my opinion, or in many people's opinion. But with the next release next month, it should be a lot faster and more reliable.
Okay.
And it doesn't rely on browser APIs. It's using, you'll actually debug, well, you will be able to debug in your IDE with community members working on that.
Yeah, source maps.
But it's using source maps, yes.
Yeah.
So you can debug in your browser as JavaScript, and it will just overlay. You'll actually see Java in the browser, although it runs JavaScript. But you still get that almost same experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you said Java 8 support, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's mainly what I was talking about for 2.7. That's mainly you'll be able to use lambda expressions. So, and we'll see how useful that is shortly. Because every time you do an RPC, you have to pass in the callback objects, and it's a lot of boilerplate. And you'll be able to use that lambda syntax that was introduced in Java 8 in the next release. Okay, where do we stop here? So this is just, by the way, can you guys see the laser point in the back? No, I guess not. You can? Okay, great. So just a few words about JsInterop, which will be a new feature coming up shortly, which will allow you to interact with native JavaScript in a much nicer way than before. So often you'll find yourself in a situation where you're having a lot of developers on the team that are really JavaScript geeks, and they just want to use Angular, JS, or whatever framework out there. You can still integrate your GWT code very easily with them using that feature where here, for example, you define an object in JavaScript. Just like a greeter that has a member field and a function. And then you create a companion Java class that's also called greeter, say, @JsInterface, @JsProperty. You see that it just maps to the property and the method name. And then at runtime, you can incubate in Java. You can just invoke Java methods, the compiler will just optimize it away and invoke that native JavaScript method in the browser. So in case you wanted to use JavaScript and interact from GWT classes, GWT Java classes and JavaScript, you can do that directly now. Okay, I'll take a step back now because for people that are not familiar with GWT, that's probably
Yeah, why don't you do that?
a little much. So let's start over in the sense of what is Errai. We know that GWT offers us the JavaScript Compiler. That all sounds a lot more complicated than it is if you want to use it. So what Errai is, we take that compiler and we try our best to provide a programming model that's declarative, annotation driven, where we get rid of all the boilerplate and allow you to reuse as much code as possible, especially Java EE code. So let's say you have a JPA entity that you use on the server, you can now use that on the client as well, as is, with all the annotations. You can actually persist it. I'll show that later. And to bring most of the Java EE 6 APIs, or 7, to the browser. Just reuse the code. You don't care so much that you're actually using that in a web app. It's just where you put it will determine if it's going to be compiled with JavaScript or not. Yeah, we have a marshaling system that's really flexible and a lot of communication mechanisms. So from WebSockets to SSE to REST support, how you can communicate between the browser and the server. So this is for people unfamiliar with GWT. This is what a project layout looks like. So you have a typical, this is a Maven project, doesn't have to be that way. But you have your Java package, everything that's in client and shared will take and compile the JavaScript. And everything that's in the server package will just be compiled, as you know, to bytecode, and you'll deploy that to your server. And then there's a source main web app, which will contain all your HTML files. You have one. And your web XML, which right now is optional, but you can have it. And there's only one file that Errai adds to this setup, and that's a properties file, which we just use as a placeholder for class path scanning. It can be empty most of the time. You don't have to put anything in there. We just need the file there, so we optimize the scanning process. So you don't have to go through the whole class path for stuff that we have to look at. So why are we doing all this? So this is the first feature. Who's familiar with CDI? Anybody? Yes? So CDI, if you will, is really like the backbone of Java EE. Your EGB bean is actually a CDI bean. And one of the CDI features that you can now use in the browser, so although this is Java code, it doesn't look very complicated. By putting that into a client package, you can actually use it in the browser, because we'll compile it to JavaScript. So what we see here is we inject an event of type document. We call it as an updated document event. So it's all just plain Java code. That add updated is optional. It's just an additional qualifier that helps filtering events. And then we add a button on the website. We add a click handler, and we simply fire that event. Okay, that's familiar Java EE code. And then observing that event is any method where you say add observes, again the optional qualifier updated, document. So this observer will get that event delivered, every method that observes that event. And now what Errai does is, this has always worked on the server since Java 86, right? So this will work now on the client, on the server, and both. So what you can do is you can fire an event on the client, you can observe it on the server. You can fire an event on the server, you can observe it on the client. So you can automatically have a loosely coupled communication mechanism. So you just fire off a business event on the server, and all your connected clients will observe that event. And they can react to that and update the UI or whatnot. So we're all about building this uniform programming model for the browser between client and the server. We already saw dependency injection, so we just said add inject, and we injected an event type. Often you need more control over what object you want to inject, so you can use a CDI Producer. Say you inject a base widget, inject this UI widget somewhere, and then you can define a method, say add produces. Again, supported is optional, add produces, and you say if HTML5 is supported in that browser, give me an HTML5 widget, otherwise a standard widget, and Errai will automatically inject the right widget for you anywhere in your client-side code.
Christian, can you go back?
Sure. It is?
Yeah. Yeah. In this, you said, yeah, I mean, when you fire an event, it can go from the server to the client.
Mm-hmm.
Client to the server, okay, you can get it. But how do you do it asynchronously, like from server to the client?
Oh, so the way this works is,
Is it like a full WebSocket?
There's a slide coming up
Okay.
in 2 minutes, but the way it works is there's multiple communication mechanisms.
Okay.
And there's a message bus on the client and the server, and they're federated. So when you start your web app, the browser starts depending on what protocol is available and federates with the server and is connected with the server. Right. So stopped here. Oops. Yes. So we already saw that you can communicate with the server using events in a loosely coupled way. But that's often not ideal. Often you know exactly what business method on the server you want to invoke, but loosely coupling that is not really beneficial to you, because if you want to know, I'm going to load that list of customers, there's no reason why I would fire an event that at some point invokes my observer. So tightly coupled you can do an RPC, like a standard remote procedure call. The way this works in Errai, you have in yellow it says shared, so that whatever is in a shared package gets compiled to JavaScript, is available on the client, and it's also available on the server. So you just say add remote, so in this case it's called a happy service. You can simply implement that on the server and annotate it with service, so that's your RPC endpoint. That could be a CDI being, it could be an EGB as well, it could be whatever server-side class you have. And then on the client, all you do is you inject a caller for happy service. That's that interface type. That also shows you how typesafe this is. Because now you can simply say, happy service call, is everyone happy? That's on the client. That's part of this interface. So if you change that interface, it will automatically, you reflected that in your IDE, it will update the server code and the client code at the same time. You don't break your client by refactoring a server-side class, which you don't get in JavaScript. So what we see here, that's an unfortunate, that's boilerplate, and that will go away with Java 8 lambdas. That's just because we can't pass in a lambda expression, so what we have to pass in is a callback, an anonymous callback object, because we can't freeze the browser. We can't do a synchronous request because essentially JavaScript is single-threaded, so we'd have to freeze up the browser until that RPC responds, and we don't want to do that, which is why we have to pass in a callback. So at this point, back to your question, how is the communication implemented? So what we see is the server and the browser both have a message bus, and they federate on startup depending on what's available on the server. So it will automatically go from, if WebSockets are active, it will use WebSockets. It will then use server-side events and then long polling. So in the worst case, it will just fall back to even short polling, where it just sends HTTP requests until it gets updates. But you don't have to deal with that. You just, once the app starts, it's automatically federated for you. This might often get the feedback that, I don't want to do this because I want to use REST and plain HTTP. I don't want to use a message bus. That's horrible. So you can use the same JsInterop. Do you know JsInterop? Yes. So you can use that same RPC mechanism using JsInterop. Only this time our interface isn't annotated with @remote. It's annotated with @path. And it says HTTP post. I'm consuming that media type and I'm producing that media type. And then you use the same mechanism. It's completely transparent. You inject the caller for that interface, and that's the same code as we saw before. Only this time, you control what the communication looks like. It's no longer a message bus. It's no longer complicated. It's a plain HTTP post that carries the JSON representation of that custom object. It's basically as clean as it gets for web app development. And again, with the advantage that you don't have to serialize customer. You don't have to know what the JSON looks like. And you can even change the URL layout. You could, for instance, say, this is no longer called customers. It's called customer/list. So your server all of a sudden lists to a different HTTP endpoint, but your client doesn't need to change. Because the code that interacts with the REST endpoint is generated for you. Right? So you don't have to change that. I'll show that in a live demo to make it more clear. So I talked about marshaling just quickly. I know this is a lot of slides. What does it take to make an object serializable? You don't have to implement serializable. All you have to do is annotate it with portable. And we have our own marshaling system. That's why we use portable to provide more flexibility. Because this is a plain POJO. So it has getters and setters. But you don't actually need that in Errai. You can just leave that out. You don't care, just marshal what you have. And you can even marshal immutable types. So a nicely designed application relies a lot on immutability, right? So here's, for an immutable type, all you need to do is you have to give us a factory method and use that maps to annotation so we know what parameter, what field that maps to, because we can infer that. That's so the basics of communication. Oh yeah, so I give quiz time. This is actually, so I'm giving this presentation, right, I had to give it to a group of students because we get interns in our office. And they said I should still do the quiz, and I actually have some swag to distribute. So who can, that's way too easy for you guys, you know. So what do I have to do to make that beer class serializable?
Portable.
Yes?
Portable.
Yeah, right. You have to annotate it with portable.
I almost said serializable, but sorry.
You just won yourself a T-shirt. Wonderful. Opensource.com.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Okay. JPA. I guess everybody's familiar with Hibernate and JPA. Not only, as I said earlier, can you use a JPA entity and put it into a client local or client shared package and actually use it in the browser, you can even persist it into the HTML offline storage. So you can use a standard entity manager on the client. Somebody clicks a button, you have an album somewhere, and you just persist it and flush it.
Where's it persist?
Into the browser's offline storage. So there's, you see that here in that screenshot? When you call, that's like your JPA entity, and you persist it. That's Chrome, I think, I took that screenshot from. And you see it stored as a JSON data structure in your offline storage. So let's say you have that use case where your user is working on a form, and then they go into a tunnel and don't have connectivity. They should still be able to save. You'll persist it into offline storage. Once you get connectivity back, you just send this to the server. And it gets even better because, you know,
How's that relate to cookies versus cookies?
oh, it's pretty much the same thing. Only the HTML5 offline storage has like a 5 megabyte limit, and cookies are really small.
Cool.
So here you can persist 5 megabytes right now. And Errai also offers automatic data sync. So Errai itself can actually detect that you're online and synchronize that entity with whatever the state was on the server automatically.
So this syncs up with the server at some point too?
Yeah.
Cool.
So you don't even have to do that. You can do it manually if you want to, but we actually offer a data sync module that will do that automatically for you. I'll show that to you in a second. Okay, before I start the live coding demo, quickly the basics. What we haven't talked about yet is how do I actually build a UI in GWT and Errai. And in Errai, we decided we want to use the best tools for the job. And we find that for just designing a web UI, HTML is just best. It doesn't make much sense to do it programmatically. We also don't want to use some XML that we transform. We just want to use plain HTML. So what you see here is a standard conform, completely plain HTML file. You can take it from a designer, from a brand team, from anybody, and use it as a template for your app. What's even more important is because we don't put any code in there. There's no, like in AngularJS, you have binding expressions, or you have JavaScript code in there as well. Because we don't do that, you can at any point in time get design updates and just overwrite the template. You don't have to merge. You don't have to merge the design changes with whatever code you've put in there in the meantime. So where is all the code? The code is in a companion Java class that's matching the template. And you can inject the data field. So here is a username password. If you go back, that ID, username, ID pass, that's what we're accessing here. By default, it has the same name. That's why we inject the data field username. If you want to override it, we just say pass for password. And we also inject, in this case, we don't have to inject. We can just say data field, create our own button instance, and then have an event handler for the button where we do something when the button is clicked. So that's plain HTML and plain Java side by side on the client. So what happens when you click the login button? So as an AngularJS user, you're familiar with that feature. What you want to do is you want to create an instance of a data model and send it to the server. So usually you have to do is you have to say user equals new user.set password equals whatever text box dot get text username dot set name. Right? You have to populate the model based on your UI fields. So what Errai offers and other frameworks offer is a two-way data binding module. So what you do is you inject the model object, in this case it's a user, and you simply use the bound annotation, which will cause it to automatically sync the data model with the UI. So whenever the UI changes, the data model automatically reflects those changes. And whenever you change the data model, the UI will update it. Which means at this point, when you click the button, that user object already contains everything that was entered in the form. And you just send it to the server.
So something, and it's probably not a good analogy, but Elastic Beanstalk is supposed to be able to provide set formats too.
Sorry, say that again?
Elastic Beanstalk, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, is that something similar to this, where you pretty much define the format, the content, so if you want to bring up another instance, so it's already predefined?
No,
I'm not sure.
the Beanstalk case, that deals with the provisioning of servers
Okay.
in the back end. This is actual UI.
Okay.
So all we do here is we define a login form in HTML. We define a Java class that gets access to the fields in the form. And we automatically bound the fields to a data model. And then we send the data model to the server.
Yeah, well, entities are different, but since they have similar functionality. But that's fine. That's okay.
Okay.
What's the security concern that you have when you have literally your business logic wrapped in your presentation that's viewable?
Well, so far, we haven't put any business logic in it. It's all client
Well,
side.
I mean, you're saving off database inserts and whatnot into viewable, and that's usually a security violation.
Right. Okay. If you persist
Yes.
the user,
Yes.
you don't have to do that, by the way, right? It's
Okay,
optional, right?
just available to you.
It's available to you.
Right.
You decide what you want to persist in your offline storage. We don't persist anything unless the user tells us to.
Gotcha.
No, we're not going and persisting anything. This is manual. In this case, the data binding just means that that instance of the user that's injected is synced with the UI. It doesn't mean that it's persisted into offline storage at this point. You would have to inject an entity manager and persist it, of course. We don't put your data anywhere unless you actively tell us to. And then the last piece we need to have a full UI framework is we need pages. We need to be able to navigate between pages. So what we have is a navigation module, same as before, that composite Java class. You annotate it with page. It becomes accessible in the browser with a bookmarkable URL. Just say hash login form, which will trigger this page. And you inject transition to another page. And then you can just call go, and you'll go to another page. So you get bookmarkable URLs for that. I know that was a little much, so I'm trying to, what could possibly go wrong, show that in a live demo, so you can see what it actually feels like to do this. Because on the slides, it's always just code snippets. Okay, let me just unmirror my display, or mirror my display. Okay. So let's see. Can you guys read that in the back? Do you? Okay. So browser. So that's what we're starting off with. This is an app. There's nothing in it. It just displays an image. Okay. So the idea is what I said earlier, that we can take a template. I've got this HTML file here on my desktop. I'll just bring that into Eclipse. I'll copy that. Just zoom in here. So here you see the layout again. You have client local is how I defined the package. I will compile with JavaScript. Client shared is both, will be available in JavaScript and Java. And servers, everything is just server side, like your EGBs or whatever REST endpoint you want to use. So if I open the complaint form now, you see it renders fine without a templating engine. It's just in the web browser view, it's already rendering. It's just HTML. You can also open that with an HTML editor. Again, you see there's some CSS in there, but there is no code, there's nothing fancy. Just HTML. And what we're trying to do now is to build our app around that HTML file. So the file is called complaintform.html. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class and call it complaintform. So next thing, the one thing I have to do is a little bit of boilerplate is I have to extend composite, which is just to mark it as a UI widget.
Is that a GWT with it? Is that what that is?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay.
We're just saying this is a UI widget.
Okay, that sounds good. It's the same.
Yeah, we actually, you can use any GWT widget with what we're doing. We're not mandating any particular UI frame. You can use Ladin, GXT, whatever you want to use. Okay. So first thing I'm going to say, this is a templated class. And that would already be enough. But what we can do is we can actually say, I don't care about all that other things on top here. I really just want this div to be the template. So we're going to say, that should be a string, complaint form, HTML, and we're going to say app template. So now we're just addressing just that inner div field, but that's optional. You can, refer to the whole template if you want to. And we also want to make this a page, so I can get a URL for it and a bookmarkable URL. And I also want to make this my starting page, my default page. So it's just going to say role default page.class. So all I've done is dragging in the HTML file and creating this Java class. And if I started this an hour ago, hopefully it still runs. So if I refresh my browser, I now get the template rendered in my client-side app. So that's not much yet, because what you need now is you need access to all of those fields, right? With access to the DOM fields and so forth. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to switch back to Eclipse. And we're going to inject data fields. And we'll start with the text box name. So by default, this name here lines up with an input field in the template name. It can be different, and you can specify that as an attribute in your data field annotation. So here I could say my name, if it was called my name in the template. So you don't have to have that line up if your designer decides to use different naming than your programmer wants to use. And we have 3 more fields. We have an email and a text area for called the text in the template. Yes. If you have questions, just go ahead. I can take it. And the next thing we're going to need is a submit button. So we want to submit it at some point. And now we're back. We now have access to the fields, and we can also hook in event handlers to add some behavior to the template. So we want to say event handler for submit. Call that on submit, and it gets a click event E. And for now, let's just print something. It's just a first step to see if that actually works.
Hey, Christian.
Yes?
That event handler submit, what you have, is that an ID or it is binding to the button submit? You have event handler double quotes submit.
Yeah.
So that submit is binding to the button.
Yeah, that's binding to that button.
Okay, got it.
So I save this. I refresh this now again. No, something wrong. Okay, it shouldn't take that long. I might have done something wrong. Oops, no. Okay. It's time my MacBook gets replaced. So if I click the button now, it will say submit clicked. One step further, but we still didn't actually get the contents of the form. So now the next step, we are going to inject our model. And I've prepared one. It's called user complaint. Let's call this complaint. So what is user complaint? That's actually a JPA entity. That's where it all comes back to Java EE. So you see you probably can't see it in the back here. It's in the shared package. So I use that on the server to persist that complaint using a hibernate, but I also use it on the client not to persist it, just to populate it, use it as a data model, because I don't want to re-implement that.
So does that mean you can only have one single model in that form that you had in the previous class when you annotated the inject the model?
Yeah.
Does that mean you can only have one thing annotated with model on that?
One per composite, but you can build one that has nested composites. You want to have one model for a set of fields, but you can build a composite that has multiple nested composites if you really want to bind to different data models. You know sort of what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than having 2 different models here, which we could do, by the way, if that was a feature request and that was actually wanted, we could qualify that model and say model 1, model 2, but it seems to be easier to define another one of those whole things for that other model with that other fields, so to separate that. But that's just a design decision, and if that's an actual feature request, it should be fairly easy to accommodate that. So where did I stop? Yeah, we have a model now. And we want to bind to that model. And not by coincidence, just these properties, name, email, text, line up with the ones in our form. But again, they could be different, right? So you can define it whatever way you want. But because they have the same name, I can just now bind those. So we want email and text. And now, when somebody clicks the button, we should be able to just, oh, it's called complaint, toString. We should have this model object automatically populated with the contents of the form. If you wanted, if your data model had different fields, you would just specify them here. You just say property equals something else. And you can also specify a converter, because sometimes I use certain datetime formats, and if you want something else in your data model, you can change that. Okay, let's save that. So let's see if my MacBook refreshes faster now. Yep, that was better. So if I populate this now, say Christian, address, I want, oops. My typing, yes it is.
Yes, exactly.
So if I submit this, you'll see that now the data model was correctly populated with the contents of the form. And we can actually, just to prove, try it again here, and click again, it shows again here. So it's tied together. If I were to change the data model programmatically, the UI would update automatically. It's the same with AngularJS, same with every two-way data binding module. The model and the UI from this point on are tied together. So what's the question here?
Here's a comment, and that is, we may talk about this later, but why do you think Node and Angular have grown so quickly in popularity when these facilities or features are there? Is it a function of familiarity, or is it, or what is it that you think is causing this?
A big factor, I think, is that if you talk to people, talk to the large JavaScript crowd, their background is very different from probably any of our backgrounds. Like if you get just a traditional software engineer who started working like 10 years ago, they will be much more leaning towards a technology like this. Often the JavaScript developers' background is and that's without putting a value on it. It's just they came from building really cool websites, and they learned more and more programming by building really cool websites. And naturally, a JavaScript framework is a lot closer to them than it is to us as Java developers. Right? It's a lot closer to home to just, oh, now I need to do more with my website. I need to build more functionality. Whereas that technology usually caters to people that are in middleware and have to build web apps. And there's a lot more people out there that build websites and small web apps than there are building Java middleware. This is one of the explanations I have, at least, for the huge popularity of JavaScript. Okay, so we have our data model. Now we want to send it to the server. So that's one more thing we should be able to do live coding for. I'm going to use JsInterop because I like a REST endpoint better than a message bus if I were to architect an app. So let's see. So we have a user complaint endpoint here, which is a very simple JsInterop endpoint. Maps it to /user complaints, and it's create, update, and delete methods. And it's a plain JsInterop interface. That interface is implemented on the server. Actually, in an EGB here, because you can combine an EGB and a REST endpoint, but you don't have to. This is just for simplicity. So that create method just takes the JPA entity and just dispatches to this user complaint service, which just persists it. So this user complaint service create will just persist it using an entity manager. This is standard Java. That's all server side. So if a create, update, and delete method, and by the way, you also see here server side we have this event called user complaint, and we fire a created event whenever we create a user. So we'll be able, all clients will be able to observe all complaints that were created if they wanted to. So now let's leverage the user complaint endpoint interface. What we do, oh, before I do that, I need more UI because I need to go somewhere when the complaint has been submitted, like a thank you page. And I'm not going to show that live because it all works the same way. It's just HTML and that complaint in Java class. I'm just going to bring that in by fast forwarding here. I think I called that. Yes. There you go. So I just brought in this page, for instance, which is thank you. So now I'm going to inject again. Always works the same, and say private a caller for that user complaint endpoint. Just going to call this endpoint. So this is our caller for our REST endpoint. What I can do now is just say endpoint.call. And what you see here is, because it's a typesafe setup, that REST endpoint is represented in a JsInterop interface. I actually can autocomplete on that HTTP endpoint method. So I can just say, yes, create, and pass in my complaint. Right, this is just going to be an HTTP post, marshaling that complaint object as JSON, sending it to the server. That's all it does. Not much magic behind. The one thing we're going to need is we want to react on the response, right? And that's asynchronous, so we're going to give it a response callback. It is organize imports, add unimplemented methods. So I get this full IDE tooling, whatever is available for my client-side code, which is really nice. And so what are we going to do? We got a response back. I guess we'll just go to that submitted page. Again, simply inject private transition to transition to, and what's it called? Complaint submitted. And call that submitted page. And all it takes, we're going to say submitted page dot go. Okay, that was a lot of code. I hope I refresh and it still works. Let's try. There you go, that looks good. I'll open the JBoss console here. So while this is running Google Web Toolkit or GWT, sorry, dev mode, with Errai, it doesn't use Jetty by default. It actually uses an embedded JBoss version in dev mode. That's optional, but it makes your Java EE server-side stuff a lot easier because you can work with it in dev mode. You just keep the console so we can see whether or not our complaint actually gets persisted. So if you fill that out now, and submit this. Oh my goodness. There we go. So you saw that our endpoint persisted it in the database. This is just a hibernate logging we see here. And we saw that we transitioned away to the submitted page. So we basically built a full login form in a type-safe and static setup with almost no code. Oops, that's the wrong Eclipse. Didn't want to show you that. So to that point, I could now go and change the URL of this, right? I could now go and say whatever. It doesn't matter because you don't use that URL in client-side code. It's generated for you when you refresh or when you start the app. You can also go and change the method names. You can completely refactor your HTTP endpoint and your client will still work. I'm not saying that's always a good idea because you probably have a lot of external clients on that HTTP interface, but the fact is you can. You can evolve your APIs and you can use IDE tooling for that. You don't have to manually go through a ton of JavaScript files and change all the endpoints. So this is one of the advantages you get. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we had some stuff pre-deployed on the server end, JBoss.
Yeah.
Pre-deployed before we started tonight.
No, it just started dev mode.
Dev mode? Yeah, explain that.
Yeah, so that's GWT's development mode. That's what allows me to just refresh my browser, and it loads the changes.
Into the JBoss server?
Well, this is for client-side changes. There is hard to redeploy stuff out there for Java EE or Java servers, like JRebel, but I'm not using it. I'm using GWT's dev mode, which allows me to refresh and hard reload changes I made to client-side stuff.
Yeah, how about the server side?
And GWT's dev mode also starts a server where it deploys the web app to. And we just happen to use JBoss for dev mode, so you get all the Java EE functionality automatically.
Thanks.
By default, it's just using Jetty, and it doesn't have Java EE. Right? That's the only difference. So this is one Maven command you start. It starts up the server. It fires up dev mode. That's it. Yeah.
One thing that was confusing to me when I was
Sure.
first using GWT was that URL, what the server was, what that might be. Good to explain that, to clarify that beautiful big URL.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So the first thing, which actually, good point I forgot to mention, when we transition to the thank you page, we actually got a bookmarkable URL. It appended this guy here, complaint submitted, automatically. So I can now actually use the back button, and I'll go back to this, right? And the forward button. This is what this Errai navigation feature gives you, that we set add page to the templated class. We get automatic URL bookmarking. And the other thing is what you see here, this is really just dev mode. Like this is just dev mode starting the code server and the browser pointing it to the code server so you can run. We didn't compile the JavaScript. We actually did that, dev mode did that for us on demand. But super dev mode will actually compile the JavaScript before you run it in a browser. But that's like really internal GWT. Like as a user, you don't have to deal with that. You just start dev mode, and that's what you get.
So the JavaScript compiler, that's still sort of obfuscating JavaScript.
Well, it's not intentional. Well, yeah, it's unreadable. It's not human readable. Even if you put it in pretty mode, you're not going to want to maintain that by hand. And it's also minified, right? So, and it's highly optimized too. So every method that you have in your client-side app that you're not invoking will be gone, right? The GWT compiler has, I think, 9 different optimization levels, and it really optimizes JavaScript hard, so it's really, really fast and as small as possible. Because of course, GWT developers tend to build really big applications because they put in, and one of our users has, I don't know how many thousands of client-side beans. It's a huge data model, and he compiles everything to JavaScript. So he ends up with this 100 megabyte JavaScript file because he has a huge app, but he doesn't mind because it's an internal application, and what GWT emits is perfectly cacheable JavaScript. So you're only going to download that once, right? And you can also employ techniques like code splitting, which is what I would highly recommend if you have avoid that 100 megabyte JavaScript file. What code splitting does is it will download the code when it's needed. So you define fragments of your application, and let's say you have this tab and it opens the admin area of your app. And only when you first hit that admin area, that's when it's going to download that split code fragment, which could be another 10 megabyte of JavaScript files. So GWT has that functionality if you want to build an app that's really, really big.
Yes, I remember. I mean, I don't work with GWT, but a number of years back, I think one of the main complaints too was that compilation, that generating that JavaScript for the many variations of browsers, it would take a long time.
Yes.
Still,
yeah.
Still an issue.
No, that's still, I think, the most valid, definitely valid criticism. It's gonna get a lot better with the next release for the one reason alone, because super dev mode is actually compiling the JavaScript. Right? This dev mode here doesn't compile the JavaScript when we're developing. It will only when we do the production compile. And that didn't matter so much because during development you don't do a production compile. What was so slow is the production compile. But how often do you do that? You don't do it during development. It doesn't matter if, to me, it never mattered so much that it took, let's say, 4 minutes to create all the different permutations of JavaScript for the different browsers, because that happens when I compile for production. I don't do that on a daily basis. But with super dev mode, every time you refresh, it will actually compile JavaScript, which forces the GWT community and the GWT team especially to make a JavaScript compiler a lot faster, which will, as a side effect, also solve that slow production compile issue. And another thing you can do is you can control how many, you're going to need less and less permutations. Like 5 years ago, the browsers had so many differences in them. They were not spec compliant, and there were so many deltas that they had to compile a lot more permutations. As the browsers get more uniform and they all agree on what the JavaScript should look like, a workable JavaScript, you'll have to compile less and less permutations. But yes, the compiling will take time. If you write it by hand in JavaScript, you don't have to compile, so you're saving that. So it's a trade-off, I'd say. Okay, so oops. Where were we?
Now, does this still allow you to just, right now you're working on whole pages. Does this still allow you to work on sections of a page? You know, using AJAX calls to just refresh a portion of a page?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so basically what we did in that REST call, underneath that's an AJAX call, right? Because it's sending an HTTP request using XHR, XML HTTP request. And you can update fragments of the UI. You don't have to update the full page. You can also have nested pages if you want to. And you design your page yourself anyway using plain HTML if you use Errai UI, if you use our UI feature. So yeah, you still get all that. So that was that demo. And the latest new functionality that we've added, and that was based on a lot of feedback we got, is that in the GWT community, how do I secure an application? Like, how can I make sure, how do I get a user to be logged on, and how can I make sure they only see what they're supposed to see, right? So we designed this new security module, and it's all centered around a single annotation. It's called restricted access. So ideally, based on our mantra, we want to code things once, and we use the same, we don't repeat ourselves, we want to use the same annotation, same programming model everywhere. We say restricted access on a page, just make sure I didn't specify which roles, which means you have to be authenticated, right? So if you log in, you can see the secured page. But I can also say restricted access and say you have to have the admin role. And I can do that, for instance, on a data field, on a UI field, which means only if I'm having the admin role, I'm an admin, can I see that link to the admin area. It works on pages, and it works on UI fields. So we said we have bookmarkable URLs to trigger that page. So if you were to go to the browser and say, secured page, and you're not logged in, it will automatically redirect you to your login page, of course. Cool. Okay. And if you see the page and you're not an admin, you're not going to see that link, or that button, or that part of the page that you defined to have restricted access. So that's just for securing the UI part. Of course, you also need to secure your endpoints. Let's say here we have a JAX-RS endpoint and an RPC endpoint. Both work the same way. You just say either restricted access on the type itself, then it's valid for all methods, or you can say restricted access on a method, which is that method you can only invoke from the client if the user on the client is an admin. So the question that remains is, how does the client know what user is currently authenticated? So we already saw how to build a login form. So what we have is this authentication service, which is just an interface. And you can simply invoke login on the authentication service, and you will come back with the user if it was successful, or an error if it wasn't. And we have a default implementation of that interface, which will work with Picket Link, the new Java 6 security framework, and that itself plugs into all kind of other like security providers and whatnot. But it's just one interface. So if you have your own custom authentication set up for your company or your app, happened to me a lot in the past, an existing single sign-on solution, you just implement this one interface with the 4 methods and define what happens if I call login. And instead of deploying our Errai Picket Link jar, you simply implement an interface and deploy your own jar, which will determine what will happen if I call login. But by default, it's Picket Link. So you can customize it any way you want. Oh yeah, I know you're not students, but I have a T-shirt left. So, what are you asking? Oh yeah. How do you secure UI elements and remote endpoints in Errai? Oh.
Yes. Restricted access.
I think he was fastest. It's an opensource.com shirt. Yeah, so restricted access.
Seems like a pretty simple model.
Yeah, it's not hard to use, and the underlying framework has some significant complexity. We're doing a lot of code generation, but it's not that hard to understand. So we get plenty of community contributions. It's not. I can speak to that if we have time. That how GWT actually works under the hood. It's not that complicated.
The question.
Yeah.
Restricted access will be the same as JSR 250, which is like roles allowed kind of annotation where you can set the roles.
Yes. We just decided that we had two different limitations. We had require roles and require authentication, I believe. And then we looked at it and said, why do we need two for that? Because one implies the other anyway, right? So why don't we just say restricted access, and if you don't specify a role, you have to be logged in. But if you say restricted access and you specify roles, it means you have to be logged in and have to have roles. So we looked at it, and there's actually, for us, we don't understand why we need two annotations. So we made it one.
So you have no plans to use in the Errai framework, like JSR 250 roles allowed?
On the client?
On the client, maybe may not be.
Right now we don't, but we can discuss it if there's interest, if there's enough interest, and we can always accept contributions, create a separate module for that, right? But for us, it was just the feedback we got is that there's so many different security solutions out there, and everybody wants something else, that we wanted it to be really easy to use and really easy to customize. Yeah. And that was the motivation. But yeah. Okay, and now this also works on mobile. So you can actually inject same dependency injection that's on the client, low-level hardware devices like a camera or accelerometer, and you can use that CDI eventing mechanism to observe hardware events. For instance, you can observe when my battery is low, or observe when my device goes offline or online. For instance, as mentioned earlier, I'm going into a tunnel, I'm getting the offline event, so I'm switching something in my app. The user persists a form, I'm going to persist it into offline storage. The moment I'm going to get that online event, I'm going to take that and send it to the server. So you can observe all the events, whatever happens in your hardware, mobile phone or whatever. And I have a short demo for that. That's of course a very fragile demo, but we'll show. Depends on good internet. So the way this is set up, we're using. What do you see now? Nothing. That's not good. So we have to unmirror this. There you go. Mirror. So here's the setup. What I did, Chrome. I've deployed this app to OpenShift already a while ago during Java 1. That's the same app. The one part of the app we haven't looked at is that admin area, which just lists all the file complaints. And what we use Cordova to build a native application from that web app. So you can build an APK and Android file, or you can deploy it to iOS or BlackBerry. It's already set up. If you check out an Errai app and you use our tutorial, it's just one Maven build phase that will actually spit out a mobile app. So let me see if I can show you. Well, we can start that. You see me now, I guess, frozen. So this is my phone, and I've installed that app. There was just one build phase. And I have this Errai tutorial. It says it. Can you read it? Yeah. So I'm going to click on that. It will hopefully, yeah. Oh, that's all recursive as all hell now. So here's the app. That's the same app we just built, right? Just packages an Android file. So I'm going to fill out that form. Give me a second so I don't fat finger this. Question. Red Hat. Oh my god. Oh my goodness. How many typos can I? Let's just type test. And so the nice thing is here, I'll show the code in a second, there's also a take picture button where I injected that camera. That's the only delta to the form we saw. I injected the camera and added an event handler to the camera to the button that triggers that camera. So if I click, it's actually not that easy. Usually demo this with 2 people. It's actually quite hard to do it alone. I click take picture. It fires up my camera. So it's going to take a picture of you guys. That's right. Oh, camera canceled. That's not good. To try it again. Take picture. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. That's right. All right. Yes, we take that picture. So you see now that there's a picture in the form. Okay. So now, if I click submit, it should appear on OpenShift on our in this admin list of filed complaints, because I'm observing that the CDI event we fired when we're creating it, that view is going to observe that event. So I click submit now. The picture is horrible, by the way. See what's going on. Just to upload it. I'm not sure I clicked the button. Let's try again. It's not uploading. Oh, there we go. I clicked it twice. It was my fault. So this is based on an Android application that's installed on my phone. That's the same application. I can show that. I'll just spare you the details. I can fast forward here. Actually, I can check out there. So we're back to a complaint form. Yes, reload. So this is our form from before, only with more Java docs. And what we did is we injected that camera object. And we have a take picture button. And we have an event handler for the take picture button. And then we just use that camera object to get a picture. And we save that as a data URL. That's all we did. And we saved that in that entity, in that user complaint entity, and we send it to the server. This is details of how to interact with that camera object. That's not really important for what I'm trying to say. It's just the same mechanism, injecting a camera, observing that somebody clicked the button, using that camera object to take a picture, and saving it. And that admin view displayed the picture right away, well, almost right away, with the if it wasn't so slow here today. It did that because it has this CDI event observer. Right? We saw earlier that our user complaint endpoint fires, when you're creating a complaint observer, it fires the CDI event, so that's on the server. But that client-side class here observes that same type. So that's why I was able to take that event and just put it into that table. And in this case, I saved you that. That's not important. I also persisted it into offline storage. But I wouldn't have to do that. I could have just displayed it. Okay.
How did you generate the Android app? How did you generate the Android app?
So how did I what?
How did you generate the
Oh.
Android app?
All you do is in an Errai project, you say, you see this here. That's a Maven command. You say it's profile. You say I want to use JBoss 7 for the server. I want to use mobile. And then you say clean install. That's it. And because you're activating that mobile profile, it will emit by default an iOS, an Android, and a BlackBerry app. And you can just install that on your device. But that profile isn't active by default because the build takes forever if you want to build all the mobile stuff. So that's all. That actually compiles that web app into a .apk file, and then on the command line you just say adb install. You connect your phone, say adb install that apk file. That's it.
That's pretty fast.
That's all it takes. Okay, so we have mobile too. We have security. I don't know how much are you guys up for some more? Or? Right? Okay, so there's not so much left. I just wanted to speak a little bit about how this all works, because it sounds like also super magical, and everybody's afraid of using it because what if something goes wrong and I have to use the framework? And it's actually not that complicated. It's not complicated at all. So usually how web frameworks work is they rely on reflection, Java reflection, right? They load your types, they inspect your types, they do something with the types at runtime. But because we're in the browser world and we're using GWT, we don't actually have Java reflection. There's no way. We don't have that. At runtime, we're just in JavaScript. There's no replacement for that. So GWT has this thing called deferred binding, which has two use cases. One is the compiler can replace a type. It finds a type and can replace it based on some criteria. So let's say here, when the type is an implementation of a pop-up window, and when the compiler is currently building for user agent Gecko 1.8, replace it with the pop-up implementation from Mozilla, because the default one didn't work. And that feature was actually implemented to create all the permutations for different browsers. So the compiler runs for Gecko-based browser, sets the property, and then the developer says, okay, but I have to replace that type with another type because the standard type doesn't work in my browser. The second use case of deferred binding is code generation. So tell the compiler, when you see a type that's assignable to that. For instance, this is our RPC proxy loader interface, just an RPC. Any interface, you see that interface, generate the actual implementation of the interface using this generator class. Okay? And this generator class emits a Java class that actually implements the interface, and that Java class gets compiled to JavaScript. And this feature is that's the whole framework I've shown you today, is all this. Where we say, if you see the type like this, then use that generator. What the generator will do, it will scan your class path, let's say for Errai UI annotations, or for JPA annotations, or for JsInterop annotations. It will scan it, build up some very simple metadata. This is the type, these are the methods, and then spit out Java code. For instance, the proxy that does all the communication with the server for your JsInterop interface, which is a very simple code. And that's what we pass with compiler to compiler JavaScript. That's how pretty much everything I've shown you today is this. Is that hook into the compiler where we say we generate some code for you so you don't have to write it. That's the whole complexity. There's nothing else there. And of course, you get access to the generated code. We put it into a sub-tier of your build project, so it's not magically disappearing. So you can actually inspect and look at that code. What is the proxy doing? So for instance, you're sending an HTTP request, it doesn't reach the server, something is wrong. You can always open that file and look at what code it actually generate. Because there's nothing worse than something happening and you can take a look what the source looks like, right? So that's it. So that, for instance, is more like a joke. That would be like if you had to manually generate a JPA meta model, let the framework do that. You don't want to generate this. Right? So this is just how a named query, for instance, would be hibernate would actually do that for you on the server and you wouldn't be seeing it. And that's what we do on the client, which is generate this for you. So you can use named queries on the client in the browser. Okay. There's a lot, there's always more that we can do. One thing that I like to do most is, I already mentioned we have data sync, but it's, I wouldn't say it's early work, it works, but it only supports a full synchronization use case, also because the client-side storage is only 5 MB. So if you persist stuff in there and it's different than on the server, we will be able to take everything that was persisted and synchronize it with the server and let you know only, let the developer know only in case of a conflict. What's OT? OT stands for operational transform. That's the algorithm, the framework for an algorithm, really, that, if you remember Google Wave, it's basically a very efficient algorithm to implement something like online collaboration, where you edit a Google Doc at the same time. Google Docs uses it too. Multiple people collaborating on the same document, and you need some very efficient incremental updates on it. And the way it works is just creates operations that will be applied to data that you can send just at operations to the server, and you can combine those operations at every endpoint so that everybody ends up with the same result. That's what OT does. So creating an incremental data synchronization for JPA and OT, that would be a big feature. Then the security module is new in Errai 3, which will, Errai 3.0 final will be out next Monday or Tuesday. And we definitely want to have some SSO integration. So Keycloak jumps to mind, integrated with Keycloak. Also, we want a finer grained security module. Right now, we have the user as roles, but we've already had feedback that there needs to be more, with fine grained permissions. So that's going to come very soon. Errai Mobile, improved offline support. There's a lot more we can do with offline support, like creating our own custom linker that would generate an HTML5 manifest for you, and fun like that. And then we want to have more demos that are automatically deployed to OpenShift. It works now. We have an OpenShift profile, but it's still, we need more of that. That was one of the feedback we got. More live demos in the cloud. Okay, I think I fired out everything I know. If you want to try it out, it's on erraiframework.org. As I said, the project is over 3 years old, so it's definitely stable and ready to. There's a lot of production apps out there that use it. You can come chat with us on Errai and Freenode, tweet at us, and of course you'll find us on GitHub. It's all Apache 2, open source, do whatever they want, almost whatever you want. Okay, thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
You mentioned that, and it's like, I guess from what I got on you start from some HTML page, and then you can model your server-side code according to that HTML page. So there's no kind of like a set of widgets that you can use.
Oh, actually, yeah, you can use. So if you go back to Eclipse and just open our form, that text box for email, for instance, right? That text box I used here is the plain classic comes with width, but you can use any widget. You can use Vaadin, you can use Jitsi, whatever you find out there that's a GWT compatible widget, you can use here.
So tabs, whatever, kind of like a tree.
Yeah, you can use whatever you want. There is no limitation to. We didn't do anything that would limit your use of GWT classes. We just changed the way we design the layout of the UI. We didn't actually implement our own widgets. We just said we don't want XML and programmatic UI layout. We want to use HTML because that's what it was built for. So you use HTML to design, but then you use whatever Java code you want to represent what's in that HTML and to add behavior to it. Okay. Whatever Java code that can be compiled to JavaScript, not whatever Java code. It needs to be translatable to JavaScript.
For single sign-on, do you support or do you have for support to OAuth and SAML?
Yeah, by adding support for Keycloak, we will get that all for free.
Okay.
Right? Well, depends. You'll get that for free because you're going to use Keycloak on the server, and we're going to be able to hook into Keycloak and ask if you're authenticated. Yeah. And Keycloak uses OAuth. Okay. And in the future, we'll use a lot more. Like basically, will become the main project for all kinds of SSO things at JBoss.
You guys want? I got some of these beer cozies type things out here. We don't have beer. We're good for sodas too.
This thing covers a lot of things.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that it's almost. I mean, what's the adaptation of this? I mean, you have people that are actually deploying enterprise applications with this stuff.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of who's using this in production?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you the well, I have a whole list of company names that have it in production. Google?
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah, almost all.
I mean, your framework.
No, Errai, they don't use Errai. They use their own internal things, but they use GWT itself internally.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So this.
And
this
we at
framework
Red
is
Hat use Errai internally a lot.
For what?
Well, we have this new framework called UberFire, which we build consoles on, console technologies, like EAP console, which is not yet using UberFire, but that type of applications are built around UberFire. And there is a lot of people in the community that deploy this to production, big companies. Yes.
A lot of stuff.
Thanks, Christian. Very good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I don't even have a business card, but you find me on
That's okay.
Twitter.
I got it. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Have you seen any big
Thank you.
existing
Very welcome.
applications be able to use Errai? Or
Sorry,
do you have
again?
to start from scratch? Like if you already have an application that uses like GWT platform or
No, you don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to use it from scratch. You can incrementally bring it in. You can just all of Errai are just GWT modules. So you could say, for instance, that I want to build this new GWT module in your app that uses Errai JsInterop to talk to your REST endpoint. Then you would just inherit that one